guest right now, someone I've debated with and against several times. One of the people I respect most in sort of the commentary and debate community. Always authentic, doesn't back down, and I think that that's a characteristic that not a lot of people seem to share much anymore. So the great Counterpoints also has gone by Counterpoints. I never know which one you're going by at any particular
You know what?
time.
That was Destiny who gave me Counterpoints. Counterpoints is what, and like honestly, it just kind of stuck, so I just kind of went with it. But no, Counterpoints is fine, man. And honestly, thank you for that fucking awesome introduction. That was great. So
Thank you.
I try to be as good faith as possible.
I mean it. Like, and I think that one of the things that's funny is I think that both of us are good debaters and we're both opinionated. It's funny because we're both stylistically very similar, where if we're on a panel with 8 people and 3 people agree with us and the other 4 disagree, both of us would rather just be by ourselves and talk the whole time, I think, on our side of the issue. So I always have to remind myself, like, yeah, he's making damn good points. I should step back and let him go a little. But it's rare that I see someone like that.
That's actually really funny. I feel similarly where it's like the fight is half the fun.
Right.
So I want to, I'm there for the engagement, I'm there for the panel, I'm there for the fun. And basically if I see like if there's just one topic where like 7 people are dogpiling one person, I'm like, I don't want to add to that. I want to, try to steel man the other person or try to give them more contentious arguments to fight over. Because it's just, I don't want to say it's boring to watch a dog pile, but it is, I don't know, it's just not fun. It's not very sportsmanlike, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that's funny, I think you've probably experienced this as well as I have, is sometimes being someone who leans conservative or moderate or populist, a lot of times the sphere is so left-wing oriented that you'll find yourself being the only person that disagrees. It's very difficult to be a moderator in those situations because on one hand, you don't want to leave one person dominate with half the time. But on the other hand, you kind of have to look at it like giving each side similar amounts of time. And sometimes that means, well, Counterpoints is going to talk 50% of the time and these other 6 people are going to talk 50% of the time, because you can't have everyone have 5 minutes and then you're responding to 35 minutes of argument in 5 minutes. It's like you said, that dogpiling's not fun or interesting content, and it ends up not being productive because it's just like you're trying to respond to 50 different arguments,
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've come because I started watching like panel content. I don't think I could watch panel content before just because participating. I wanted to, I always wanted to participate and I didn't have it. And now I'm trying to really I'm trying to refine the argument, boil it down, and try to take the minimum amount of talking time. That's obviously super hard, but I think there's a strength in trying to be efficient.
Yeah, I was just talking about, I think it's one of my weakest points. And it's ironic because I was good at it in the game of policy debate that I did in college, because you have a time limit. You have 9 minutes in your first speech and 6, so you have no choice. Now you talk like an auctioneer because it's stupid, but it's built in there, and like word economy and things like that are important. When I stream, like, it's a big joke in my community. If I'm doing a stream by myself, I'll be like, I got to be done by midnight. And at 1:30, I'm wrapping up. And it's like, you got to learn, like, sometimes brevity is the better part of discretion, I was saying earlier.
Yeah, and brevity is the soul of wit. But for me, it's hard. It's hard to be brief when you're so passionate about so many things, and also when other people say so many dumb things around you. That can be quite frustrating.
And I know I've seen it in your eyes. Like, I know you've shared this experience with me where you'll be like, okay, I've talked a lot, I'm going to step back, I'm not going to say anything. And then someone says something, you're like, shit, now I have to get back in. I just told myself, like,
bro,
this is it.
Bro, that has happened so many times where I'm just like, I can't let that one slide.
Yeah, it's funny. It is really funny. So, we were going to talk about sort of the direction the Republican Party should go and things like that. I did want to ask you a question because I haven't had a chance to ask you this since. Many moons ago, we were involved in this ridiculous Odyssey game thing, right? And I was drunk off my ass. I forgot it was happening. I ate some bugs, and then I made an ass of myself and just bowed out. Did you win that? And were you awarded like the prize that they promised for winning that?
Indeed. So we, got together. We strategized. I ate some bugs. I tattooed myself. I have an Odyssey man on my chest here. You probably can't quite see it. But indeed, we did win and take home the cash prize and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, fun stuff.
It was fun. Like, I thought it was interesting. It would have been better if I wasn't blackout. It's one of those things. It actually got me in trouble because Lauren Southern, like, kind of was my contact to that. And she was like, yeah, they'll be sending you stuff in the mail. Please don't open it. We'll do it the day of. I forgot the event was happening, and I had prior obligations. And so I had to take my computer on the road and do it. But anyways, I'm at work doing block shifts, and my wife texts me. He's like, call me. Like, I could tell she was pissed. I'm like, uh-oh. She's like, you think it's some fucking joke sending a stripper pole to my house? And I was like, I have no fucking idea what you're talking about. Like, she thought it was like some joke, but yeah, that was part of the thing that they sent you for one of the events.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna say is it was actually quite rigorous, and I don't know if I fully won. So the first round, I had to eat a tarantula, and I did. And the other person had a shellfish allergy, and they used their shellfish allergy, I'm going to say, as an excuse to not eat bugs. And then the second round, I was supposed to hang upside down from a stripper pole by my feet. But that's a lot easier said than done when you're, more than 200 pounds. So I wasn't really able to do the move to the judge's satisfaction. But then the other person messed up their ceiling with the drywall. So then I won that round as well. And then, And then the third round, we had to open up our pictures and show them to the audience and scroll through. And basically, like, I save like thousands of memes, and I also don't save pornography to my phone, and I don't cheat on my wife. So I was like, yeah, I'll show you all of this. I'll show, flipping through. And then Nuance Pro bowed out because he probably had like dick pics or anything.
Right.
So won that round. Then
you're in the 1% of streamers that aren't cheating on your wife or have copious amounts of porn saved on you. Yeah,
right.
You did it.
Good spot to be in.
I lost the first event, and so then I had to put together a puzzle of the Capitol, and they literally had to wake my drunk ass up that was passed out to do it. And I don't remember. I deleted the video because I was embarrassed, but apparently I was just yelling about Lauren, and great replacement theory and Nazism, and just like calling out Destiny, and just like, I'm just gonna shit on everyone, like.
Listen, it happens to the best of us. Okay, sometimes people deserve a little bit of flack back. And and then Endernax and I did a round. I forget how I won that. Oh, we had to do a handstand against the wall. So I won that one, and then he went into the semifinal where he had to call his parents and say horrific stuff, and he actually did say horrific stuff. But the other person, Dick Masterson, is just kind of a degenerate, so he just like kept upping the ante on saying degenerate things to your family, And so he lost that round. I went into the final round. And then Dick Masterson trolled me. They asked us to tattoo ourselves. And Dick Masterson said like he didn't have a camera that would be capable of showing the tattoo. And then he faked doing the tattoo while I did it for real.
Oh, man. That's see, I didn't even know there was like a cash prize. Like, I was just like drunk. Yeah, I'll eat these bugs. And like, my wife was telling me afterwards, she's like, so the girl I was going up against, she's like eating like a competition eating, like, and I'm just sitting there chomping like, how's everyone doing today? And they're like, yeah, you're really missing the point of this, dude. Like, it's not
a competition.
Like enjoying a meal here. Like, hey, you're not bad. But
this isn't so bad.
It was fun.
This is like fuzzy chips.
Yeah. I had water bugs, not tarantulas, but yeah, I should have thought of the shellfish.
Dude, I ate a whole ass tarantula. It was a lot of tarantula.
It was funny. I got to give it to them for the marketing aspect of it. It was an interesting thing. So
yeah. Well, I'm definitely gonna get shot in the face. But so if you wanted to get into the topic, I don't care if you want to talk about something else. If you want to BS for a bit, I have no problems.
No, but get in the topic, sure, whatever.
Yeah. So what I was going to say for the topic, basically, I recognize that my version of Republican is actually in the minority now. And so that's kind of the scary thing is like, Trumpism or the Make America Great or Make America Great Again is 55-60% of the party. And it also seems like my side of the party doesn't really want to upset that side of the party too much. So what ends up happening is we're just kind of along for the ride. And so that's kind of the frustration. But then I also feel like Make America Great Again has had some frustrations and failures over the past couple of years. And so I'm wondering if they're going to evaluate it. So that's kind of like my general instinct about the topic is I'm in the more chill, rhino, moderate, statist side of the party, and it just doesn't seem like the party is as interested in me as I'm interested in them.
It's strange because, like, if you talk to people, so my feeling on it is this: I am more of the populist wing of it. I would be, if you had to break it binary, I would be more the "Make America Great" portion of it. But I certainly criticize Trump a lot. I think the biggest criticism to levy at people on my side of the party is there's sort of this cult fanaticism of whatever dear leader says can do no wrong for some people. I think that's a terrible mentality. I think that we had a unique option with Trump where because he wasn't an ideologue for all of his foibles, that I think that he was malleable, that his audience could have convinced him to possibly change positions by saying, no, this is what we support. I think you saw that with the Second Amendment. He didn't seem to be too ideological with the Second Amendment. So he's like, bump stocks. And then I think he was kind of shocked to be like, holy shit, my audience is pissed about that. Like, I think it took him aback a little. So I think that there's a mistake to have this cult-like mentality and that it shouldn't, this movement, Trump was impressive in his own way. He did represent sort of an avatar of the movement, but he was just a person in the movement, not the movement himself. And I think it's interesting, though, because I think that what you see is some people in my position, and myself to some part, would say, even though this is the direction the party's trending, the leadership of the party, your Kevin McCarthy's, your Mitch McConnell's, they're still the old guard type people. And when it comes to sort of the important changes, they're going to hold back the important parts of going towards this more populist movement. So it's weird that both sides see it as like, on one hand, you could see it as like, well, I think the party's moving away from me and why am I interested in it? But then some people are saying like, well, what is the Republican Party doing for these up and comers that are trying to change the party? What are their leadership doing? So it's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, well, and that's actually precisely what I was going to say. I find it interesting that you were kind of like, no, we're not as powerful as you think we are because we're actually being held back by the establishment, which I think you can see in a variety of attempts by Trump to secure his platform. Basically the main party wasn't. They would let him get symbolic victories, but they wouldn't let him get what he actually wanted, and so. So that's kind of interesting, but I guess my fear or my anxiety about the future is that like the boomers are going to die, man. That whatever that brake system is that's in the Republican Party now, that's kind of stopping them from being MAGA populist, whatever you would call Make America Great Again. That emergency brake is gonna go out. So then what? And then that's where I kind of think you're going to have a MAGA party largely. You're going to have Democrats not really. They'll be like more like a progressive party that's trying to keep the leftists at bay, like the actual socialists and communists. But then they don't really seem as interested in keeping them at bay rhetorically. They just seem interested in keeping them at bay politically. So then that makes me more scared because it seems like you have more rhetorical pushback in the Republican Party. Than on the left. Like Biden virtue signals to the far left all the time, even if he doesn't do their legislative agenda.
Yeah. Well, let's see if you agree with this. I think when we're talking about the old guard Republican Party and sort of a shift towards MAGA, I think there's two issues worth focusing on. There is the policies and the focus that they have, but there's also the stylistic differences, right? And sort of, like this sort of like, F you, go on the offense, the media is the enemy, that sort of mentality versus... So I talked to this guy a lot. He's a Republican County chairman. He was on my show earlier. His name's Don, in Perry County. His name's Don McClure. And I always say that he's sort of the yin to my yang. Because I need to be reined in with sort of my fuck it, burn it all down mentality sometimes. And Don's someone who's saying like, you have to operate within these mechanisms. And as much as you might say, well, I don't like, I see perceived failures on the establishment Republican Party, and I do, and I could talk about them, till I'm blue in the face, but you still have to operate within that mechanism. And the truth is that the ground game that makes the Republicans successful to what they are because a bunch of people that, regardless of their motivations and what you think about their specific positions, they've worked on the ground for decades. There have been people involved in their county Republicans that have It's a big part of their life. They go to these dinners. They hobnob with state level Republicans, with national level Republicans. That's your ground game. Those are the people that are, and you can't just be like, F all of you. Right? So there has to, if the Republican Party, even that I envision wanting with that's the stylistic version. If we want to get to where I want to be policy-wise with sort of this populist conservative, we have to build some sort of bridge to that old guard Republican Party. We do. We can't just be like, F all of you, we're going to go
or
home.
do you need to wait? Because to be honest, I think they're kind of on their way out.
Well, it might in the future be on the way out, but in the short term, it's not going to work out.
Short term. Less than 10 years, I would agree with you that you probably need to build some bridges, yeah.
Right. And here's the thing, right? It depends on who you ask. Like, I don't know. You have to check yourself, right? You always are a victim of the moment. But there is part of me that feels like things are getting different. That sort of the authoritarianism I see on the left's becoming more and more brazen. So you might say, do we have 10 years? Can we survive?
Have you seen, so for instance, the thing that I've seen though is I've seen an Overton window shift maybe even in the past month, and also I don't know how bad how hectic Elon Musk owning Twitter is going to be. But at the same time, I think it's impressive that basically like, he took over the platform. People are assuming that it's a more free speech thing than maybe it really is. They're kind of presuming some stuff. Advertisers are backing out because they have cold feet, which is causing Elon Musk to be even more aggressive. And then he's basically saying like, hey, you need to pay me, $8 a month or whatever the deal is in order to try to get this thing going. And so it's a question of whether or not it's all going to collapse in on itself, where it's so financially unviable that it actually tanks Elon Musk a little bit, or it's a question of whether or not like the right wing now essentially does have access to the mainstream narrative window and Overton window, which would be, frankly, quite the big reversal considering how much censorship in terms of service have been a part of our lives for the past decade.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, it is interesting argument. Like, one of the things I think that I need to do a better job, and conservatives need to do a better job in general, there is a lot of incompetence that occurs in politics. I'm always shocked. Like, when I get involved in politics and run for Congress and stuff, I had this idea that everyone's going to be these super professional, impressive people. Not many of them aren't, which is weird. But there is something that's true. When your enemies signal fear of something, and I don't mean enemy like violence or things like that. I just mean people that you're disagreeing with.
Political opponents.
Yeah, you might pause and ask why. Why is there such vitriol? To me, the ironic thing is I don't think anyone on the left fears that Elon Musk is going to come in and censor them. They fear that they won't censor conservatives or dissident leftists. That's the fear.
Dude, that's literally it. And I was just on a panel, and I swear to God, the subject, like, I don't blame people for not updating their talking points or whatever, especially when you have the same conversation 20 times. But basically, the talking point was literally like, should we platform Nazis or something like that? But of course, like, Nazi is such a huge Overton window. They also just mean, Christian conservatives and Trump supporters and all that kind of stuff. So should we platform these people? And it's like, I'm sitting there, I'm watching the shit show, whatever. But to me, I'm thinking to myself, it's like, bro, you don't have a fucking option, because what's happening is Elon Musk bought Twitter. He will be looser with the restrictions. He will be looser with the bans. Just by virtue of who his base is. And then also, conservatives are creating alternative platforms, and ultimately there will probably be a viable platform eventually that I'm not going to say it's going to compete with YouTube or Twitch for money, but they'll probably compete for airtime and viewership. And so I don't think it's an option to push people out of the Overton window anymore. I don't think it's going to happen.
And it's crazy. I don't know if you've experienced this. It's getting off topic a little, but all these conversations that people want to have on these panels about privilege and things like that. One privilege I really consider having is because I was someone with conservative leanings that was in overwhelmingly left-wing spaces like academia and the policy debate that was the left of the left. I was forced to learn to defend my positions because every right-leaning impetus that I had was constantly scrutinized by almost everyone I knew. It was like, no, that's wrong, that's big. And so it makes you stronger to have to defend your positions over and over. I think a lot of these left-leaning people have never encountered someone like me than you that's like, I'm not a rabid bigot. I'm not someone advocating for violence. I'm someone that you might disagree with, and hell, you might even beat me in an argument, but I'm making reasoned arguments. And a lot of people have never even encountered that. They've been in this bubble for so long. And it's interesting to see because I think that's where the shrieking's coming. It's like, but what if these people are allowed to have a voice? Then what happens? It's like, right. That's an interesting point for you. We'll be ready, you know?
Yeah, so the main thing that I think is not scary but interesting. So the people that they want to push out of the Overton window are Christian nationalists. So people who want a Christian theocracy and who want to use politics to create a Christian theocracy. That's who they partially want to push out the Overton window. And then the other people that they want to push out the window, they view as like flexible authoritarians. So we might not agree on this, but I feel like Trump was willing to push the boundaries of the institutions that were meant to check his power. And he basically, like, if he could get away with it, he would try. You know, that was kind of his attitude. So for those people, they absolutely want to shove those people out of the fucking Overton window. And again, I don't think they're going to be able to, but I think the main thing is now what? Okay. So you got 30 or 40% of people who could be reasoned with, could be negotiated with, could be bipartisan, but then you paint this broad, like, Nazi brush of everybody who's fiscal conservative, social conservative, anything except for progressive, basically wants to basically put trans people on trains and ship them off to concentration camps to work until they die. And that might not be a mainstream narrative, but that's a mainstream narrative on Twitch and YouTube. Is that we're inches away from LGBTQ intentional genocide.
That's Fosh's entire stream, right? Like, I watched a stream where he said he was talking about this genocide, and it's the sort of dog whistling is amazing because he's like, wouldn't you have stopped the Nazis, blah, blah, blah. And then he has to buttress himself, be like, I'm not saying use violence, but wouldn't you have used violence? And there's a genocide against LGBT. And then he eventually says it. He says, I want to see a world where those dumb fucks at the Patriot Prayer rally in Portland that were riding around in trucks get shot at out of windows by progressives. And I was commenting, I put out how insane that is. And I'm not here to shit on Vosh. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying he should be deplatformed or anything like that. But what I thought was interesting when I called him out on that on Twitter, some of his followers were like, he never said that. And then when I put it out, they were like, well, of course, those are Nazis. We should shoot at them. And it's like,
well, so yeah, but that's the moral calculus. So he puts the moral calculus of that statement into the fact that, like, well, they're driving around in their trucks trying to intimidate minorities by, carrying guns and blah, 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 and therefore they're technically the aggressors. And so that's where you could still, if Twitch wants to get sensitive about it or YouTube wants to get sensitive about it, he can say, oh, no. Like, I don't mean, I don't mean just regular conservatives. I mean people, fascists like Proud Boys and, I'm trying to think, Patriot Prayer and all these people who go to instigate and kill minorities. Like, so, and then there's enough progressives who think like he does that they would probably agree with him. And they would just be like, oh yeah, of course.
And it's discourse that's been going on even mainstream. Like, remember the narrative when Richard Spencer got punched? Is it okay to punch a Nazi? No, because one, it's not unless it's in self-defense in the immediate moment. But second, because you'll call everyone a Nazi. Once you justify the stakes are high enough to justify some sort of violence, then you're a stone's throw away from saying, oh, and that's it. This situation right here, that's it. And so that's, I think, what we're talking about. It's not just this direct, like, calls to violence and things like, it's also this.
It's the boiling point.
Right. It's this moral certainty that, like, these people don't even deserve to have a voice. And what happens when, I've said this, I haven't heard a lot of people say this, but to me, when you see violent lefties like Antifa and stuff, a lot of times you hear this narrative that violence is the language of the unheard. There's truth to that, right? You're more likely to riot if you can't operate throughout the system and have power, so your last resort is sort of engaging in some sort of violence. They're engaging in that violence, and even though the institutions aren't technically on their side, they're sort of flirting with it, right? They'll turn the other eye and say, oh, there's not violence.
Oh, as long as it's convenient. Yeah, as long as it's convenient.
So what happens if those systems start to crack down? What if those systems no longer are on their side? I think that the violence you'll see in the short term from those groups will be insane, because they're going to lash out because they have this sort of valve where it's like, well, we got these other institutions we could go to right now, and we'll still engage in a little bit of violence. But once those institutions are no longer with them, I don't know what's going to happen, and I fear for that, not in a violence way, but in a rhetoric way.
To be honest, I feel like they're going to back off, because I don't think they have the fucking stones to fucking do shit when the institutions don't back them. And then the other thing that I was kind of thinking, like, so I am okay with yelling at people, screaming at people, having fun with political debates, and also being passionate about things that I care about. But I'm not one for intentionally trying to incense my audience into a fucking, like, furor, right? Mm-hmm. And so, when you have Twitch and YouTube pundits who are contributing to this fucking, like, bloodlust, this like, zealotry, I can't believe, like, they like then have the balls to be shocked when somebody goes to the Speaker of the House's fucking house with a hammer and tries to fucking do their fucking head in with a fucking hammer. You know what I'm saying? Like that. It's even if you're like, oh, that's a schizophrenic. I never meant for us to get that far. I didn't want that to happen. Blah blah blah. It's like, by raising the temperature, you're just making it inevitable that somebody eventually is going to be like, wow, the world is falling apart. The country is falling apart. We have to do something. These fucking lizard people are running the country and they're not taking care of us and blah, blah, blah. Well, might as well go do something. And then they fucking go and do it. And it's like, all right, well, what did you expect, basically, is my question.
So I like talking, so I'll engage with this. I find, though, that a lot of the people that are using the Paul Pelosi situation are bad faith, because it doesn't mean that you can't criticize Democrats and we should censor people like they're saying. And it is true that there are radical right-wingers that are irresponsible and some that are just heinous and do violent acts, right? But I think that a lot of this is bad faith because the people that are engaging in this are just, if not more, sort of vitriolic in their statements. And when left-wingers engage in violence, all of a sudden they want to ignore it. They don't blame their own rhetoric. I think a lot of this is a response, but you're right. It's worth talking about. Let's go back to Pizzagate, right? Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was just going to say so my main beef or whatever is, so I think you can appeal to hypocrisy, and I think you're right that the people who are fucking clutching their pearls right now are the same people who engage in similar behavior. But I also think that there's something, so that's like an appeal to hypocrisy, like, oh, look at these pieces of shit who are fucking, whining now, but look at what their rhetoric is. But I think there is a responsibility as somebody who participates in this space to say, like, hey guys, this is like, all of this is fucked up. Like slow down. Like, of course, like my take on the Paul Pelosi situation is, I want politicians to understand that if they don't address the needs of their people, things like this can happen.
Sure.
And that's not exactly a completely sympathetic fucking perspective for Paul Pelosi. But I'm also not the person out here fucking saying, like, let's go do this shit,
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. And it's very difficult, right? Like, there is part of what I do this for fun. It's not my career. I do it because I enjoy it. When it's no longer fun, I'll stop doing it. I have a limited influence. I'm not like someone with thousands of people watching, but I do understand that there does, because people are listening to me, and I hate to humble brag here, but I think I am persuasive, right? And you have to understand that when you're talking about issues that you're passionate about and serious, I do think there's a moral obligation to sort of let people know that it's not desperate and end of days and you have to do anything possible to survive. And I tried to do that.
Sorry, I got stabbed in the dick while you were talking.
See? I try to do that. Like, and I think that you know, it works out for me because I get to be authentic, because I find political violence of all stripes to be morally reprehensible, but I also find it to be strategically reprehensible. I think that it's counterintuitive to anyone's agenda. Now, right now, the left gets away with it more because they are controlling institutions, and so there's more of a defense, but it doesn't really help the left either most of the time, the political violence.
No, it doesn't. And dude, that's the sorry for interrupting, but I was just gonna say that's the other thing that I kind of wish they would realize is like, bro, like BLM fucking shit the bed because of the way that everybody was conducting themselves.
Yep.
So literally what happened was you had all this groundswell of popular support ready for police reform that was ready to do all this shit in the wake of George Floyd, and then what'd you end up doing? You just fucking rioted and fucking threw Molotov cocktails and broke into enough businesses that eventually all the people were like, well, fuck it, bring the cops back because the legislators aren't passing anything. My downtown is getting fucking wrecked. And the cops are the only people who are going to stop anything. And literally, like, you can see the spike. It went up to like 70% support for BLM, back down to like 26. So it was amazing.
Now, listen, I probably have slightly different takes on January 6th than you, but I'll say this. It's a rival of what the bigger PR disaster is. Having almost the entire world on your side for Black Lives Matter after George Floyd and pissing it away, or having the moral high ground as right-wingers saying, we don't do that shit, and then January 6th happening and giving this huge PR victory right back. Now, I think that there are extenuating circumstances, but I said on January 6th, there are people that engaged in violence. I don't want to hear, oh, they were all Antifa, there were FBI informants. All of that may be true. There were, regardless of what you think, right-wingers that engaged in violence on that day. It's been exploited. It's been blown out of proportion, yes. But those people that did that massively blew it out of proportion. And let me say something my audience isn't going to like here. I spent 2 weeks, again, I did a live stream. That was when my son was supposed to be born, January 6th. I did a live stream before they made it into the Capitol saying, what the fuck is going on? Don't do this. I spent the next 2 weeks arguing with dumb shits that were calling into my show saying, well, the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed with the blood of tyrants. I was like, shut the fuck up. You're morally wrong, but you're also strategically wrong. I'm like, you don't see how this is going to be a turning point. And so it's funny to watch that ball pass back and forth of PR disasters of sort of a movement in the left and right.
Well, and that's kind of that's what's amazing to me is to have somebody a week before saying we need to wash the blood with or wash the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants and whatever. And then like 30 seconds later when it's like, oh shit, this went sideways. Just kidding. It was Antifa that instigated it. Right. And it's like, bro, like you gotta pick a fucking lane, right? Like just pick a lane. And you can pick a lane. And by the way, like I won't shit on you for it. If you're like, hey, I legitimately think the election was stolen. I think it would be worth our while to investigate it further. This is the evidence that I think. Like, listen, I might not agree with you, but I'll at least humor you for the conversation, basically. And and basically say like, no, it was stolen from Trump. I think we're under the fucking control of globalist elite pedophiles who fucking blah blah blah. I'll hear you out. But basically but then stay in that lane. Don't then back up and then tell me like, oh, but Antifa, you wanted to do this.
Right. I totally agree.
If you could have done it, you would have done it.
And here's what I was saying where I'm lucky. What I'm about to say when I talk about the strategic deficit of engaging in this behavior, it makes it sound like, oh, Rob's full of shit. Really, he doesn't mind violence, but he understands it doesn't benefit his side in this. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm lucky in that I vehemently am telling people, whether they believe me or not, I fucking condemn all this violence. I do. I do not think that there has been a situation in the past 150 years, if not longer, in this country that justifies this sort of political violence that we saw from Black Lives Matter, that we saw, even if I think it's overblown, that we saw on January 6th. But the strategic value of it, what I try to convince people, when people think the stakes are this high, they say, well...
wait, you're back.
Oh, shit, I'm sorry.
I lost you for a second.
Yeah, Rob, your stream is down.
Oh, okay. Let me... there we go. It says reconnecting. We'll see if it comes back here. Hopefully it puts me back on YouTube. And
no rush on my end. I'm just bullshitting and shooting people. And I do have work tomorrow, but it's relatively late, so I won't complain.
Let me know
Okay,
in
you're
the
back
chat
on.
if you. Okay, you can hear it. Sorry about that. Am I on all the platforms, YouTube and Twitch? Just let me know, Aftershock. Okay, I'm good. No, what I was saying is this. So when I talk about sort of the strategic value, there are certain people that aren't persuaded by the moral argument, right? There are people that say, well, yes, no one really wants to cheer for violence, but this is the time. The stakes are so high that we need to do violence. And so what I say to them is, if I can't persuade you that it's morally incorrect, let me persuade you that it's strategically incorrect, right? It's going to backfire. If you're a right-winger, the reason it's strategically incorrect is because the institutions are against you and they're going to bring the boot down on you. It's not a fucking game. Like, you're going to lose your freedom. You're going to go to prison. Like, and you're stupid.
And that's happened to a good chunk of people, right? Like
some people that didn't deserve it.
Fucked around and found out.
Yeah, some people that didn't deserve it. It's been, obviously, I think it's been over exploited it, but like, these people are so stupid, some of them. They're coming on. I'm using my real name. I'm talking. There's information out there about there. I have people that have followed me saying, like, Rob, you need to talk about how we need to storm this building. I'm like, are you fucking insane? Even if you believe this, your plan is to announce this on a public platform? Like, what are you doing? Like, it's just so stupid. Yep. Strategically, the violence will not help you. The strategic power that the right has is that they're seen as less insane right now. So don't give your opponents that gift. You don't have. Yes, I know that a lot of people, Black Lives Matter and people associated with them, rioted May 30th, 2020, attacked the White House, used Molotov cocktails to turn down a guard station, and nothing was really made of it. But the media covered for it. The intel agencies didn't really bring the hammer down.
And that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say, you have to understand, like, the perception, the most recent incident is always going to be what's in people's minds. Always. So you can say, oh, well, BLM had, like, an insanely larger impact compared to January 6th. You can say that this was, like, a larger, that like the damage compared is, like, we had one fucking bad day. Y'all had a fucking summer. So you can go with that. But a lot of people are just going, fucking hell. Sorry. I got to kill somebody. There we go.
Playing, Rust?
Digitally.
Yeah.
But you can say that, but then a lot of people are they're gonna remember January 6th more because it's more recent, and also it's more dramatic, and it's also played on media more. Like right. you're just gonna have to deal with that.
Yeah, and you have to understand that there are consequences to losing the culture war. There are. I'm not saying it's fair. In fact, I was on panel after panel before January 6th telling left-wingers that were making excuses for left-wing violence. I said, you realize you're making right-wing violence inevitable because you can only play the game so long where you say it's okay for our side to do it, it's okay, that some knucklehead on the other side will say, well, then I'll play that game.
Oh, and that's the other thing that's really frustrating for me too is basically, like, I view this as being made possible through the rhetoric of the past half decade. Like left-wingers being super cavalier about violence, where they're just like, oh yeah, well, whatever, we'll punch a Nazi, fucking, it doesn't matter, we'll do it, we'll take the fight to them, And so I think that's just fucking crazy because all they did is they enabled the right wing to say, oh, okay, you want to play that way, we'll play that way too.
Yeah, and so I think that all of that leads to, like, I consider it my moral duty that when I'm talking about how bad shit is, to also make sure that I'm talking about how those sorts of reaction are immoral and not strategic. And then I also, something I do that just comes natural to me is, I'm lucky, like, I have a life. Like, I have a wife, I have a kid, I have a job. And, like, you have to understand, at the end of the day, like, I hate to spoil this, you ready? Like, 100 years from now, no one ain't gonna remember any fucking one of us. Even our distant relatives might see our gravestone once in a blue moon, right? At the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. You have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror. You have to have those relationships with your friends and family. And those are the things. I don't get blackpilled because of that. Things might get real shitty, but I'm one of the luckiest people that ever lived. And I try to tell people that those relationships are more important than working yourself up to the point where you're going to do something rash and something stupid. And so don't get blackpilled. There's always, the pendulum always swings the other way, right? There are better ways to go about it than this violence. So I really do try my best to illustrate that. And I do think that people are irresponsible. And oftentimes it's unfortunately, there seems to be a benefit, content-wise and viewership-wise, to have those shitty, irresponsible takes. I think it's overwhelmingly more on the left in our sphere of like Twitch politics and stuff by the nature of it. But even on the right, like I know how I could get more viewers. I could come on here and be talking a bunch of QAnon bullshit, and I would have more viewers probably. But I think it's nonsense,
Well, I like to steel man QAnon. Okay, so basically, I think that we're ruled by a bunch of really powerful people, and their morality is for thee, not for thee, not for me, and all that kind of shit. But I don't think they're actually fucking lizards or whatever other fucking thing, wild shit that people fucking have to, contend with. Like, and I don't think they're running like an underground pedophile ring that's gonna, be shattered by JFK Jr. or whatever. Well, so that's the thing. I think if you acknowledge the kernel of truth, then it's a little bit
I
better.
agree. There's certainly in any sort of movement like that's going to, of course, the reason it gains success is because there are kernels of truth. To me, it's interesting. Like, you don't need to make up wild conspiracies about
the real ones are there.
It's there, man. It's right in front of you. Like the Epstein stuff that you can see, it's there. One of the things I thought was so dangerous, and it's hard to tell people this, because if you again, trying to steel man, if you really believe that children are being sexually exploited in different locations around the country, like that's as high stakes as it gets. I understand being impassioned about that, but you got to be fucking careful. It's one thing to accuse public figures like Hillary Clinton. It's another thing to accuse some guy who owns a pizza shop who happens to know Hillary Clinton. Like, that's fucked up. You better be certain before you're levying that accusation. Like, you better be damn certain, because you're ruining someone's life. Like, there is, we don't want to return the favor that we see on the left. I always find it funny that you'll see, I watch these, like, I Am a Killer shows that my wife likes watching. I'll watch. It's amazing how many people are killers and they'll admit to some homicide and they'll be like, but I'm not a racist. I'm not a rapist. I didn't rape that girl. I just murdered it, right? It's weird how there are things that are more stigmatizing than being a fucking brutal murder. And like calling someone a rapist or a racist or something like that, and maybe even more heinous than that, calling them a child molester or something, that's as serious as it gets. And so to flippantly throw those accusations out, you're playing with fire,
Well, what I was going to say is I'm sorry for laughing, but basically, hold on. I have to let the dog out, but I was gonna say, I always lean into that a little bit of being like homophobic or transphobic or like racist or whatever. Where I'm like I don't try to be those things, but I try to say like, okay, now what, right? Okay, so you heard my argument, you don't like it. You don't like you assigned me a label. Okay, now deal with my argument. And that's kind of what I like to do in the debate sphere in particular, because I feel like it's more people get caught flat-footed because they just expect to be able to label you or hit you with the label, and then for you to just kind of get stun locked and only focus on that.
Right. Yeah.
I'll be right back. And entertain the folks for a second. I got a dog who's crying.
Okay.
1 second.
I will do that. But yeah, it's a good conversation. I want to get into, when I'm talking to him, about what specifically policy agenda he doesn't like about MAGA. But I do agree that stylistically, like, we do have to be careful. I'll have this conversation with Counterpoints because I know that he's someone that's approaching it from a good faith argument, and he has condemned the violence on the left. But I will not have this conversation with people that I personally saw or were cheering for people in positions of power that made excuses for left-wing violence and refused to condemn it or refused to step in when it was occurring, and then demand that I do the same. I have been as unequivocal as imaginable in condemning all this violence, and so I'm not going to leave people use that as a weapon against me. So I wanted to ask you, what specifically about sort of the MAGA agenda policy-wise are some things that trouble you if the party goes in that direction?
I'm just so the main thing is isolationism. I'll say that, like, so I'm kind of a geopolitical nerd. I'm a military guy, all that kind of stuff. And it's not whether or not we can reduce the size of the military-industrial complex, or if we can prioritize like American global goals over those of our allies or enemies. I'm okay with all of that. But basically for me, that would be a calibration. Whereas where I kind of hear the MAGA movement or whatever, I hear more of like a jerk in the opposite direction. And so that's kind of where, for me, that's scary. Then I'm okay with like some level of economic redistributivism and also like infrastructure investment. I feel like, conservatives haven't talked about investing in America in a really long time. But basically, that gets a little scary when the Democrat Party and the Republican Party are all fucking not fiscal. There's nobody who's fiscally conservative.
Right.
And then I'm trying to think of one more. Oh, and then the anti-immigration stuff. Like, I'm okay with it to a certain degree. Like, I want an absolutely controlled border, but when it kind of gets to, I don't want to say racist, but when it gets to like, no, nobody's allowed in, fuck them all, like all that kind of shit. Like, I think we could again dial it in more intelligently than that. So that's like the main thing.
So I'll say, like, I'll go in reverse order. Like, starting with the immigration, I do think, like, I think a secure border is a precursor to any sort of agreement on what we do with legal immigration. Without the secure, but I'll be talking to Fabian Liberty later. I think Fabian's a really smart guy. He's an ANCAP. The big criticism with ANCAP is it's just not workable in the real world. It's something that, okay, on paper we could talk about it. And you were in the debate with me, with him, and Last Username, right? But I feel the same way about what some people talk about illegal immigration. Well, we'll just deport them all. You can't do that. You can't deport tens of millions of people. You can't. You might say, I want to. You can't do it. It's not feasible. And so you have to approach not just from sort of it sounds good on paper and this ideology. You have to approach, like, is this workable in the real world? It is not workable to deport every illegal immigrant, nor do I think we should. I think that there are processes that we could develop to not give them full citizenship, but to allow them to stay unless they break serious laws, and then give paths to full citizenship that would have military service or other forms of civic service that we might be able to agree upon. But all of that is down the road from securing the border. But I agree with you. Oftentimes I find that there's sort of this almost childish looking at it from the MAGA perspective, where I think we have the right perspective that, dude, both parties have let this open border, which is a disaster, and they tell us, like, oh, it's a good thing, it's a good thing, it's a good thing. But as soon as you ship illegals off to their neck of the woods, they're like, oh, shit, this is a burden on us. I agree with all that, but you still have to be practical in what your response is going to be to that.
Okay, so I just want to cathartically enjoy this meme with you, okay? So I get, like, Martha's Vineyard came together for a day to feed the immigrants, put them in a church, all that kind of stuff. And they're like, look how much better we are than you. But then they didn't get their messaging together because they literally put them on a bus and shipped them off to a fucking, to like a military base the next day. And so like their entire, and then there was other people with messaging that was basically saying like, oh, well, Martha Vineyard's full, we don't have the resources in order to support this many people. And, it's just not really like logistically intelligent and like blah, blah, blah. And I'm just thinking to myself, it's like, when the lefties kind of whined to me, I had to say, okay, yeah, it's a dumb publicity stunt and maybe it's a little bit fucked up to do that to human beings and blah, blah, fucking blah. But at the same time, I also kind of had to laugh a little bit because all of the arguments were like, tit for tat what border towns have been saying for fucking decades.
Yep.
And they repeat back the arguments from border towns without even thinking about it.
Yep. And it's
they don't even think about it.
They were full of shit. Like, to me, the summarization of sort of the faux progressive, the NIMBY, not in my backyard, is watching all of those people go, Miyama, hugging each other as they put them on the bus, like, and off to the military camp with you. And they're like high-fiving each other, like, we did it.
Yeah, we did it, guys. We gave them barbecue food for a day. We nailed it. It's like, bro.
I think my high school band had 48 people. Thank God our bus never broke down in Martha's Vineyard, because apparently we were fucked, because there is no hotel or anything to put 48 people for more than 48 hours in Martha's Vineyard. Bro. Despite their vast amounts of wealth, they can't, and their narrative didn't even make sense anyways, where it was like, it's the off season. Oh, so you mean the tourists aren't there, so there's
there's more buildings that are empty. Okay, got you. Oh, yeah.
And it is like, okay, you do look at these illegals as they are human lives. And I say this all the time. It's important to understand that, too. You could want secure border. Like, for example, this isn't a law, but I have a house, and I might feel bad for the homeless person that lives that I see 20 minutes away. I ain't letting them move into my fucking house. I feel terrible.
Right.
I will do things in my life that could maybe help some degree for that homeless person until it becomes too much of an imposition on me. Similarly, I don't begrudge the illegal immigrant. Right? If you're legitimately the shitheads that are violent criminals, cartel members, that's one thing. But the average person that just is like, I just want a better life for me and my family, I don't begrudge that, but the system needs to prevent it from occurring. That's how I feel. So there is this sort of like, are you toying with someone's life? But I think that the good outweighs the bad in this, where it's like, listen, we're just taking the left at their word. The illegals are great people, and Florida and these border towns are racist for not wanting them, but sanctuary cities like Martha's Vineyards want them. So match made in heaven. Match made in heaven.
Didn't you love? So the other thing that I loved was where they were like, "What the fuck does Ron DeSantis know about immigration? He's not even in a border town." And I was like, "Bro, what the fuck? Like, so you're telling me like immigrants just fucking they cross into Texas and Arizona and they just stop? Like, what the fuck are you talking about?" And so the real, I guess my real problem was not even the fucking like the situation or whatever. My real problem was how fucking stupid the rhetoric was from lefties, where they couldn't hear themselves saying what border town right wingers have been saying for decades. And then also saying, like also criticizing people for like not having a simple understanding of immigration. Like I couldn't, I don't know, bro. Like I literally couldn't. And it was so stupid that I stopped paying attention because I couldn't handle how fucking stupid it was.
It is one of the only times you'll see. Like, well, not one of the only. Like, it's rare, though, that you see the direct consequences of someone's claims and actions affect them in such a, like, physical, real way, right? One example that comes to mind is there was this writer for, like, the NBA, sports writer or something. I remember tweeting out, like, the first night of the George Floyd riots, like, how dare they try to prevent this? And then, like,
that
2 hours
was
later,
my favorite. Yes, burn it all down. Burn this motherfucker down. It's like, these animals, they're in my neighborhood. It's a gated community. You have to get out. Get these people out. And I was like, bro, like that's just like it's the most hilariously stupid and hypocritical fucking thing I've ever fucking seen. It was amazing.
And what's funny is, though, that there are people in our, academia, people that we would consider sort of institutional powers in that, people involved in the media or academia or think tanks or something, that they'll tell you like, well, wait a minute, this violence, blah, blah, blah. It's the same with illegal immigration. Like, they just bullshit you and it's not true. But Cato tells me that it's all gravy, man. Illegal immigrants, it's all good when they come in. And you're like, but this border town has a population of 10,000 people and they're currently housing 5,000 illegals. That's not sustainable. Like, that's a massive, even if these are good people, that is a massive influx and drain on them. And they're like, no, look at this study. Here's a study. And it's like, it's so hard to argue against that because there's an economic incentive for all these studies to come out. And basically the best way to respond to it, it's like, okay, you take them. And then they're like, oh, no, we can't take them. And I'll be talking to Pisco next. Pisco's
in New York.
Yeah, right.
And
DC,
New
York. Yeah. I'll be talking to Pisco
sorry,
next.
we just don't have the infrastructure for it. Really? That's weird.
But, little town in Texas does. I'll be talking to Pisco next, and Pisco, like, honestly tried to, with a straight face, tell me things like this. Well, maybe Martha's Vineyard just didn't have, like, the money to be able to provide for them for another day. And you're just like, Pisco, do you really fucking believe this? Like, come on, don't bullshit me. He's like, well, just because they're wealthy, maybe their government spent frivolously and they didn't have a war chest, a public chest. It's like, go fuck yourself. This is bullshit. You know what happened there. Like, you know what happened. And it's okay to be like,
Listen, I don't. So one of the things when I do argumentation or debates or whatever is I never try to presume like. I never try to presume like the mentality of the other person on whether or not they're bullshitting me or whether or not they've like self-deluded themselves, because I don't even care, because I feel like the other people should be able to see that, right? Like where this isn't really adding up. A bunch of millionaires who put like those those signs that my wife put in front of my house where it's like no no person is illegal. In this house, no person is illegal. Black lives matter.
Yeah.
You know, I don't even know the rest of. I don't even remember the rest of the shit. But basically, like, and then oh shit, I actually have to help people. Let's push it off. Let's push it off to somebody else.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
wanna do it.
crazy. I think that I was talking about this with the previous guest here. Like, I remember doing a panel once of right wingers of different stripes and left wingers, and I remember it just struck me, whatever conversation we were talking about, that the fundamental disagreement on that night with our worldviews were the Democrats, particularly the big government socialists, derive their morality by voting for the right things, right? And the conservatives were saying, like, well, we do actions. That's where we determine if we're moral people or not. So the difference would be like, well, I think that we should have less
hold
taxation.
The right views.
Right. We should have less taxation, but I do volunteer at the soup kitchen versus, well, fuck the homeless people. I step over them, but I voted for Bernie. Right. And like, that makes me a moral person. And it's very interesting because it's like, I quote this guy a lot and I don't know why. I find him interesting. I don't know if you know who Slavoj Žižek is.
Of course.
So I was interested in Zizek through debate. I read some of his evidence, and I don't consider myself a scholar of him or anything, but he talks, I remember this one movie I watched of his, it's called A Pervert's Guide to Ideology. He talks about like Starbucks, right? And he said, I think it was in that movie, he says like, the lefty, the shame is built into the can. It's built into the beverage. So you pay an extra 50 cents. Now I'm a good person for engaging in consumerism with a company that's exploiting workers, blah, 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 and all the shit that care about. Yeah. But I paid an extra 50 cents and it went to some farmer in Peru. So it's all gravy now. I'm all good now. I did it. And it's like, could you do less? But you still get this moral satisfaction. And that's a lefty saying that, which I found interesting.
Yeah, and I have to go grab the dog because now she's done chasing rabbits. But yeah, that's like, that's absolutely the thing. And then, let me hold my thought. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem. What's up, my brother, Jesse, my real brother in real life, Jojo Geeker. What's happening, man, on Twitch there? I don't know if anyone else is on Twitch or not. Unfortunately, my stream cut out at some point. Is it working on Twitch? I think so. But yeah, it's good to hear from you. For those that didn't know, Jojo Geeker on Twitch, he actually streams. He streams more games. I know in October he was doing a lot of like independent horror games. So give him a check out there, Jojo Geeker on Twitch. But yeah, go ahead. You had a thought there?
Well, yeah. So I wanted to tout the Counterpoints community for being based for a minute. So we did, when the Ukraine war kicked off, we did a $4,000 fundraiser. Got it to the we got it to their armed forces. We got it to a guy who was helping refugees cross Western Ukraine. So we did $4,000, and that was in a fundraiser, right? Then we did $1,700 for a gentleman who has a heart issue, and we got that to him. And then also, sorry, shooting this guy in the face. I got him.
I saw that you were like, when you were out, you were posting pictures of when you were out working in the community.
Yeah, and that was the other thing we did. So we did a $2,400 fundraiser for the community to do hurricane relief, and son of a bitch. And then we probably volunteered for an entire week, and then worked our dicks off the entire week, and had like a $10,000 impact, chopping up trees, removing them for people who couldn't afford it, drying out buildings, all that kind of stuff. So we're just talking about like one mildly right-wing person who, let's face it, I got 28K subs. My average live viewers is between 30 and 50. And, I don't make that much money off of YouTube or whatever. Right. And yet I've had like a $20,000 impact. And yet we have all these fucking charlatans, no offense, but charlatans to some other fucking dickheads who are making hundreds of millions, or not hundreds of millions, but they're making millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they fucking virtue signal endlessly about the plight of the fucking working class and shit. And yet they can't be bothered to fucking have an impact. And it's like, okay, all right, fuck you. I don't believe it.
Right, they'll do the one-day charity stream, but they're not going out there and doing something.
Which is still their viewers' money. It has nothing to do with their efforts. It's still their viewers who are the good people.
I think about this a lot. Let's say I'm a college student and I'm definitely a socialist, and I like Bernie Sanders, and there's these I won't mention them by name, but there's these big left-wing streamers that I'm watching, and I'm like, I'm struggling. I'm eating ramen noodles. I'm living off my student
let me give him
refund
$5 so he notices.
Yeah, let me give it to this millionaire. Let me donate this money. It's like you literally could have done anything to advance your socialist cause more than that. You literally could have walked down the street and found someone to give $5 to, and it would have been better spent. I don't begrudge. I'm not here saying sour grapes. I wish I got their money. Damn them. Hey, run your grift. Run your
Give me
grift.
your money.
Yeah, run your grift, man. I don't give a shit. But it amazes me that people fall for this shit. It's like, really? Like you don't see the inherent contradiction here. You don't see like that your money's going to someone who's like, virtue signaling their socialist bona fides, but when it comes to real world action. I did want to talk about foreign policy. I think that that's an interesting point of contention because I do think we have disagreement there. I would call myself more of an isolationist. However, I think that it's worth noting that I understand that there is a credible argument to a more unipolar interventionist style of governance, that there is a successful argument that could be made for it. I think there's a reasonable, robust debate to have there. My problem is that a precursor to that debate occurring is that I find the institutions that are in charge of making those decisions to be irreparably corrupt. And so I've been lied to about the Iraq war. I've been lied to with color revolutions. I was lied to about Libya. And so how can I trust those people to say, but this time it's important. This time we need to go into this country. I can't trust them. So even if there's a persuasive argument on the philosophical sort of ramifications of should we be more isolationist or interventionist, I can't trust the people that we'd hand the keys to be those interventionists to do it.
Well, yeah. So I think the key there is it's kind of, for me, it's kind of like the bell curve, where it's like we should be we should be the world police, and that's like the dumb guy, and then it's like no, we should be isolationists because we've been lied to so many times, and it's like the smart guy who has like a 110 IQ, but then there's like the 160 IQ guy, and it's like no, we should be the world police, and so like. Yeah. The way that I feel about that is I think thinking of the United States as a nation is almost a mistake at this point. And the reason why is because we're not just a nation. We're a $65 trillion commercial empire. And so basically, whether you want that responsibility or not, we already have that responsibility because our economies are so like inexorably basically tied to all these other countries, and as a result their welfare improves or destroys our welfare as well. And so that's kind of where, for me, I'm not saying we have to be like involved in every war, but we do have to maintain some level of global stability and open commerce.
So I don't disagree. That's certainly true, right? The old mantra of, alliance with no one, free trade with everyone. Like, there's merit to that. I get that. You don't want to be isolationist to the point where you're not exerting. For example, one thing we don't talk about a lot anymore is soft power, right? The idea that you could be a world power through your influence, through your economy. You don't need to fire one bomb, no one missile. Another thing that's kind of part and parcel with that is the parts of hard power that are your military is so robust and equipped and efficient that no one even crosses the line, right? A great military would be one you never even need to use because your opponents fear the stakes of doing it. But I think that unfortunately, what we see is a lot of the if I accept the premise, like, look, in for a penny, in for a pound, it's too late now. We're already involved in this. I agree with that, right? But the problem is, at some point, we have to acknowledge, like, this could easily be exploited over and over again for nefarious reasons. And the only assurance we have to stop that is to at least temporarily pull the reins back and say, we can't trust these people anymore because, the same argument could be used in perpetuity. And it leads to some absurd contradictions that are almost as equally as absurd of the Martha's Vineyard thing. For example, I'm told that we have to stay in Syria. And the reason we have to stay in Syria is because we were there fighting ISIS, but Assad was also fighting ISIS, But al-Nusra and groups like that are fighting Assad, so we kind of had to benefit them some. And all this shit's going on. If we wanted to leave now, the problem is our NATO ally, the Turks, would commit genocide against our allies in Syria, the Kurds, right? And it's like, this whole shit, it's like, are you shitting me? Like, how can I even believe this at face value? It's so nonsensical. And yet I'm told, like, well, you just have to accept this. They're experts, you're not. You have to accept it without question. And at some point, I'm like, look, you're right. If we would pull back in the way I'm suggesting, totally disband or revamp our intel agencies and things like that, no doubt there will be pain. And there will be people that are our allies that will suffer because of it. But what's the consequence? That we say, well, 10 years from now, we'll fix it. And then the same sort of shit happens over and over. And they create more and more problems that we then have to deal with 10 years down the road.
Well, but that's kind of where I want you to scale these things. Like, I'm a huge history guy, and so I always scale things based off of impact. And of course, like the global war on terror is like a multi-trillion-dollar, security enterprise that's largely failed. And the only thing that it succeeded in was in militarizing the world. So basically, like, now everywhere is kind of like a low-level conflict. But if you look at the, compared to World War II or compared to, I don't know, even Vietnam, it's basically a blip on the radar, like as far as like casualties and even civilian deaths and like all that kind of shit. And so the point being that, you have to, there's $65 trillion that is guaranteed, like, of economic activity that's roughly guaranteed by American military supremacy. Then there's like another 20 or 30 trillion that's guaranteed by the actions of our adversaries, our rivals. Mm-hmm. And so I think you could scale that back where you could say, you're responsible for your security, but we're going to train you and we're going to give you the equipment. And after that, you kind of got to fight it on your own. That would be more of my solution instead of like trying to reassume a purely nationalist mantle.
It's not a bad idea, but again, the problem for me would still be, in order for the mechanisms to work that you're talking about, we would have to have people in charge of them that are operating in good faith. Like, let me give you an example. We had 17 generals that were at one point in charge of the 20-year Afghanistan war. Every year we were told, we're winning. It's almost over. We're winning.
But if you asked any Marine or airman or soldier in 2011, they would have told you this place is going to go tits up the second we leave.
That's
like that. If you asked any enlisted person under staff sergeant, like they would have told you that shit instantaneously. And so for the military folks, at least for me, it was kind of, and like I saw articles talking about that shit too, where they're like the generals are basically lying. Like Vice News did a piece called "This is what winning looks like," and it was kind of just known that like the central government was so corrupt and so distrusted that all the Taliban were really doing in the final years of the war was keeping the peace, waiting for us to leave so they could do whatever the fuck they wanted to do.
Right.
And so that's where, for me, I think what was going on there, sorry for ranting, but no. I feel like the executive branch doesn't want to be in charge of a war that we're losing, or admitting that we're losing, or admitting that it's pointless, right? They don't want to admit that. So they have to hold the ball, and it's just going to be a game of who finally eats the shit sandwich. And I think Biden was just the guy who was finally like, yeah, fuck it, 20 years, 5,000 lives, a few $1 trillion. Let's just eat the shit sandwich. I'm senile. Nobody's going to give a fuck about it anyways. And that was basically what we ended up doing. But I think it was moral cowardice on behalf of previous administrations.
Well, I don't disagree, but you can see the cost, not just in dollars, but in, time spent and PTSD and lives of U.S. servicemen and, people in Afghanistan. Like there were
but we're all pawns. We're all pawns in their game. Right. I wouldn't sweat it too much.
Again, fool me once though, right? So like I see that they're intentional lying that brazenly. I will say this. Listen, I think you'd be someone who shares this belief with me. I'm comfortable in saying that. Like, I think both of us are people that are cheering for America, even if that means the people we didn't vote for ends up doing good. I didn't want Joe Biden to fail. I'll be clear about that. I would have, I would have been happy to eat crow.
Yeah, Mark Twain is my favorite author. I'll give you two quotes. One, I never lie because then I don't have to remember anything. That's my favorite. And then the second one is, it's like patriotism is loving your country and wait. It's like patriotism is respecting your country and respecting your government when it deserves it.
Right.
And I think that's such a fucking good quote because it actually like it leaves some room for accountability for the government, which no offense to anybody here, but it's basically a bunch of cosmopolitan jerk-offs who want to siphon their economic well-being off of the global economy, and they don't care about us as individual inputs. But just because that's true doesn't mean it's not important. So for instance, like Rome, the Empire of Rome, one of the greatest civilizations to ever exist, you could say exactly what I just said about Rome, but that doesn't mean that Rome wasn't an impressive civilization, and after its collapse, terrible things happened.
That's right. I don't disagree. The question becomes, how do we limit, and I'm sorry, this might seem
Downfall?
selfish.
Probably don't.
Right. It seems selfish, but I'm sorry. Our government should exist for the benefit of the American people first and foremost. I also believe in a do no intentional harm philosophy. So I don't think that we should be, America first, take the resources of our neighbors. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, and so looking at it through that perspective, what I see, then you take Afghanistan, or let's take Ukraine, right? Regardless of what you think of Ukraine, it is clear, and I don't like Russia, and I think Russia is by far majoritarily at fault, just like I think Al-Qaeda was majoritarily at fault for 9/11, right? But Ron Paul was onto something when he said, well, we have to look and say, what did we do? What could we have done different to sort of prevent these bad actors from getting to this conclusion? I feel the same with Ukraine, where it's like, we're meddling in all sorts of things. In 2014, we're basically engaged in what's tantamount to a color revolution with Victoria Nuland, taking away one of Russia's key allies in Yanukovych and having Poroshenko win that. The Obama State Department is basically funding what would become their FBI, the NABU. They're basically funding all sorts of little proxy excursions into, eastern Ukraine and areas that are seen as, close to Russia. Simultaneously, we're bombing Syria, another ally of Russia, have troops on the ground there. And there's all this provocation, and people like me are warning over and over, like, look, this is dangerous, and everyone was like, Russia won't do anything. They're a paper tiger, they're not going to do anything. And then when they invade, they're like, now see, and it's like, you have to ask yourself, would we have been better to not be doing that meddling in the first place? Would it have been a better situation?
But see, my evil, maniacal, globalist worldview that is not a moral defense but more an explanatory mechanism comes into play. Prying away Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, trying to think of like the next people over that are fucking useless, by the way. I'm pretty sure like Romania is like a part of like NATO. What the fuck is Romania going to do if we go to war? Prying all those people away into either the European Union or NATO or whatever, that is not a attempt to not provoke Russia. That is an attempt to expand the global commercial empire and American hegemony. So that's where basically like, the motivation, it kind of doesn't matter if Russia reacts because we have a different moral system where like liberal democracy, mixed economy capitalism is the only system to be. And even if you're not that, as long as you help us get where we need to go, you can be an ally. And if you fuck with us or if you have your own agenda that's separate from ours, then fuck you, we're going to steamroll you. And I understand, we've killed probably a few 100,000 people now with Ukraine by proxy. But that's the global commercial empire continuing its steamroll.
I don't disagree, right? There's certainly financial motivation. We're misled as to exactly what the support is for these decisions. I don't disagree. I agree with you that that's the motivation. The problem I have is there's consequences, right? Like it's hard to force. It's the old adage, it's hard to force democracy on a country. Like the failure of Afghanistan fundamentally was that you can't, like as heinous as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda was, right? When the U.S. soldiers go in and start burning poppy fields, like what that looks like to the people of Afghanistan is, what the fuck? Like these people are coming in and they're taking my livelihood.
The fact that the central government collapsed in 11 days is an indictment of the 20 years worth of effort. But likewise, what I would say is the continued fighting by the Ukrainians is whatever the fuck is an opposite of an indictment. I don't even know what it is. it's an indication that we're actually investing in people who care enough to fight for what they believe in. And so for me, like, the Ukrainians have heartened me in a way that the Iraqi army and the Afghan army has completely fucking disillusioned me with what American training is capable of. The truth is, if you don't have a force that's willing to fight and believes in the fight, it doesn't matter how much fucking money and weapons you give them.
I don't disagree with that. I don't. But the question is, are we doing them a service, right? Because, like, looking to the provocation
but they're also making a choice. They're making a choice.
But the choice sort of becomes inevitable because as long as we keep pumping weapons to them and their leadership seems steadfast, and as long as we're getting these weapons, we're fighting, and Russia's not going to back down. I mean, even the State Department said off the record to mainstream media outlets, like, we don't fucking know how this ends. We can't see either side winning. It's just going to continue in perpetuity. And so the question is, instead of sending trillions of dollars to enrich sort of Lockheed Martin and, Raytheon with weapons that go over there that will be told in 10 years, whoops, terrorists got some of these weapons. Where did they get these Javelin missiles? Where did they get these things? Because we're not keeping track of all of those weapons. And in order to facilitate that fighting to continue, would we been better served to make some concessions in sort of that economic world alliance, and what's taking the form of a military alliance, to say we're willing to make some concessions to Russia if possible in order to sue for peace now, which in the long run, given the right circumstances, may be better for the people of Ukraine than fighting a war that they're going to be the grunts of. And they might have the passion to fight, but they're the ones that are going to die. So is it really a mercy to them, or really a positive to keep that facilitated?
I've brought this up a number of times to George Haney, who's like a geopolitical analyst. I brought this up to Dylan Burns. I brought this up to anybody really, Russian or pro-Ukrainian, where I'm basically like, hey, based off of the momentum I'm seeing on the ground and the commitments of both sides, I think that Ukraine would make a mistake by taking back Donetsk and Luhansk, because if they have popular support with the local people, like if the Russians have popular support with the local people, you're going to get bogged down into an insurgency, and that's going to drain your resources, and it's going to make it easier for the Russians to counterattack, and basically you're going to lose more than you did before. Zaporozhye, which is southeast of Donetsk and Luhansk, or excuse me, southwest, and Kherson, both of those oblasts, which is like counties, both of those are north of Crimea. I think those are still in contest. I don't think there's enough Russian support and enough Russian material assets there to completely keep the Ukrainians off. But then Crimea is so important, I don't think that it would be worth it for the Ukrainians to take that back either. But I'm an American. That's my read on the conflict, and I'm not the person fighting. And what I've heard from all the analysts is that if fucking Zelensky took my approach, where he said, Russia, you get these two territories and you get Crimea and fuck off and let's stop the war, he would be deposed. It would become a military dictatorship, and the military would continue the war, because they do not want to cede a single inch of territory.
Well, that might be true, but here's the thing, right? You could say the same about like the military. What's the word I'm looking for? Sort of courage, or it's not the good word. It's late at night. I've been streaming a lot, but like of Japan, right? Where Japan, like it was when you hear about the humanitarian in you says like, my God, dropping the nuclear bomb. What a disaster. But then when you read, like, well, what would it have been without that? What would the stakes have been? It would have been this drawn out, bloody, they're not going to give up. It needed to be such a brute show of force. Arguably, like, I'm not a student of history, but that's the narrative.
I'm actually with your analysis, despite it being hotly contested in modern circles. I'm actually completely fine with your analysis.
Right. And I'm aware that people disagree, but that makes sense, right? So we need a brutal, immediate show of force to discourage them from, to understand, like, look, it's time to give up. Like, the question is, let's say that's true. Let's say that Zelensky gets deposed, the military. How long can they keep it up? Right? Like, if the U.S. turns off the faucet, how long can they do it? Because here's what I'm worried about. Like,
they wouldn't be able to.
Right. And so if you look at this in a practical nature, you could only, let's say for the sake of argument, hey, thanks so much for the raid. I really appreciate it. I really do. Welcome here. I'm talking to my friend Counterpoints. Right now we're talking a little about Ukraine-Russia situation. my worry is this, right? Like, well, not even worry necessarily, but if you look at this from a practical nature, you're only going to keep the unlimited money faucet on for so long, and something's going to happen. Maybe it's the midterm and it's people changing. Republicans win, arguably. Maybe it's just that, like, the Biden administration's like, look, we can't do anymore. We're losing popular support with this back home. What happens then? And so it seems like we're just stalling the inevitable, unless there is a credible case to be made that sending this money now results in such strategic military victories by Ukraine that it puts Russia in such a hole that they have no choice to be like, we have to turn tail, or we have to get a saving face measure that basically is super beneficial for the Ukraine. I think that we're just delaying the inevitable, which means more deaths on both sides and more money spent and more money to military defense contractors, because we're just keeping it going. The grunts on both sides are dying, but at the end of the day, if there can't be a concise victor, it's going to happen. At the end of the day, they're either going to sit down at the table or the worst happens, which is that a weapon gets used that it's horrific to even think about. And the stakes then escalate to,
No, so I'm going, but here's the thing. I think that even the use of like a tactical nuke would be now. Of course, for all I fucking know, there could be a fucking ICBM on the way to fucking Orlando right now. I don't know. Right. But I feel like it would be such an escalation that the world would be so horrified by that even Russians would probably depose the Russian regime if that were to occur. And so one, I hope it never gets that far, and then two, we would have a pretty drastic response. Three, I'm pretty sure Poland, Lithuania, and Estonia are like pretty much chomping at the bit to go fuck some Russians up, and Russia can't stand against the entire world. And so I'm not saying that as like a threat or whatever, because I do understand like Russia's geopolitical interest in what they're doing, but my frustration. I don't really have a frustration. I do have a frustration. The thing is, I don't think this is a fucking oil tanker, and we saw that with Trump, because Trump. I think there is such a thing as the deep state. Destiny and I talked about it. I kind of told him my definition of the deep state. He didn't really seem to have that much contention with it, but the deep state isn't a bunch of like nefarious administrative bureaucrats or like mustache twirling villains. It's basically administrative momentum, where people have built institutions with a purpose, and those purposes have to perpetuate themselves, and because those purposes have to perpetuate themselves, they're going to do these fucking things, and one of those things is American empire. So Russia, unfortunately, they're on the wrong side, and they're going to get fucked. And Ukraine is on the correct side, but they're going to have to pay the price.
Right, but you look at it from this stake. Like, but at the same time, if the fear is, well, we could broker a peace deal, but it would result in, Zelensky knowing he would be deposed, so he has no choice to be, all in on it. Like, the same could be said of Putin and Russia, right? Like, if you're looking at this and you're saying, like, and I don't think it's an unreasonable position to say this, vis-a-vis the United States world position versus Russia, it's only a matter of time if the United States wants to take down Russia, to take down Russia. It's just a matter of time, isolating them from the world stage, correctly pointing out crimes that Russia's done and terrible things that Russia's done. Like, it's inevitable, the writing's on the wall. If you're Russia and you're looking at this build up to this invasion, and you see what's going on in Ukraine in 2014, and basically Ukraine, I feel so bad for the people of Ukraine, because they went from, basically being the puppet of Russia to being the puppet of the United States. It'd be a damn shame, God forbid we get someone who's actually looking out for their interests first and foremost. But when you look at those sorts of things, like maybe
okay, but what you just said though, to me that doesn't exist. So so for instance, like Afghanistan, okay, and I'll try to be brief, but Afghanistan, when we supported the Mujahideen, right? We gave them Stinger missiles. They kicked out the Russians. They blew up all the fucking helicopters and shit, and then the Russians eventually got sick of it and left. So what ended up happening was, in the proxy war, we left. There were like 4 different factions. It was like the Hazara, the Taliban, the Southwest Pashtun, and then the Northern Alliance. And those groups, like the Northern Alliance was supported by Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. The Hazaras were supported by Iran. I think the Taliban were supported by, in the Mujahideen, they were supported by Pakistan. and then like Oman like sponsored like a random group. And so like this state that exists without the military, economic, and political assistance of another nation just does not exist in the current era. And this was like the 1980s.
No, I agree.
Or
That's
1990s.
fair.
So
You're
I
fair.
just don't think it exists.
That's fair, and you arguably could say like, is it any more different in the like it? As important as I think national borders are and sort of a nationalist view of the United States and caring about the people of the United States first, there's a legitimate criticism to be made that even within governments of these countries, certain groups could say, I don't feel that shame that there's not a group in power representing me. So, certainly even at our level, you could say, so I don't disagree with that. But I guess what I'm saying is just, the build up to this, I think that cooler heads could have prevailed in the build up to this, because
I'm with you.
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, if you put Russia in the position where they think like, fuck, inevitably the trains are rolling, and then eventually we're going to get steamrolled. So we gotta pick a chance now. We gotta do something now. And as much we started to talk about Biden's Afghanistan withdrawal, I actually respect him for it. I thought we should have withdrawn. The problem was how he did it, and how he did it to me was sort of a signal of weakness, and maybe just the timing of that signal of weakness mixed with Russia thinking like we have to act soon because the time's running out, because this slow encirclement is eventually going to render it impossible for us to do anything. And I worry that if you back them into a corner like that, and like, even the idea of nuclear weapons, I agree that it's a very low probability. But if it comes to the point where like Putin may think that we're attempting to assassinate him, or that it's going to get so bad that he's going to be deposed anyways, he might make a show of force in a grotesque manner that could be something regrettable. And even if it doesn't get to that level, which I don't predict it will, I don't see how it ends without like sort of horrific consequences for the area. If Russia thinks there is no hope, eventually these are our enemies, there's no hope, they're going to keep encircling us no matter what. To me, it just seems like this is dangerous. This is the scariest sort of geopolitical situation probably, and Biden said it to donors, since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
But the Putin regime, this is kind of where I want to scale what you said, because I think that Russians are putting it in the rhetorical frame that you did, but we're not talking about the dismantling of Russia. We're talking about, well, although I guess if you were a white nationalist, you could make that argument. What we're talking about is free trade with the rest of the world, or relatively free trade to a certain standard, and then we're talking about interacting with your neighbors relatively peacefully, and then we're also talking about negotiating, Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the thing. It's like, I don't think anybody wants to actually like drop bombs on Moscow or St. Petersburg or any of that kind of shit. I don't think anybody wants to genocide the Russian people. I think what they want is they want the United States. They want to be in the European and United States' orbit, and they don't want to be in the Russian orbit, and that's an intolerable situation for them. So
right, I don't disagree, but then right, I don't think that Putin's looking at it like we'll be wiped off the face of the earth. I think he's looking at it like we lost the Cold War, right? Like the Soviets lost the Cold War, and for years now it's been a unipolar world. It's undoubtable the U.S. was the hegemon. But Russia still had this place of importance, right? Yeah, right. And I think that they're looking at it like we're going to be relegated to like basically minor league status.
Yeah, second class citizenship. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, they're going to be in the United States' orbit, and that's an intolerable situation. They view themselves as a rival or a peer, not a subordinate nation. I think I've heard Putin say as much, is where he was like, hey, we respect, the United States as the global superpower, but at the same time, the United States needs to understand that we are a power within our own right, and we deserve some level of respect and dignity, which includes control of the affairs in our own backyard, which like I understand. But then when you start talking about like Westphalian sovereignty or whatever, where every country is supposed to have some level of say over its own, like within its own borders, at that point that, it's like my rights to throw my fist ends where your nose begins,
right?
But scaled up to a nation.
Yeah, I again, that's probably right. But you have to then look at like, what's going on then with the United States in the lead up to this, with sort of the advancing of a military alliance and the continued? I think cooler heads should have prevailed then. They didn't. Okay, it's done. But this is, the reason we're on this is because I'm saying, although I think there's an interesting debate to have about sort of staying out of world affairs at this level militaristically versus using military power to try to curb the amount of damage that's done. The reason that I reject the latter fundamentally, without even getting into the debate, is I don't trust the people that would be responsible for that are capable or are non-corrupt. And so for me, when I look at this sort of poor situation,
by corrupt, do you just mean that they're like boys with the Defense Department and the generals or whatever who run this shit? So they're either making money or they're making money by proxy. Like, is that what you mean by corrupt?
Corrupt's a weird word. So let me put it. It's a loaded word, and let me say why. Like,
well, I mean, I agree. If that was your assessment, then I agree with you.
Right. So, I don't know that I would use the word corrupt to describe that, because, like, theoretically, you could say this. You'd be like, there could be the noble lie. Like, if you're engaged in intel, you're not like, it's not exactly corrupt to lie to the. Like, for example, let's say that the reason we raided Afghanistan and it was never said to us was we 100% our intel agencies knew that there was a dirty bomb that was going to be released, and so that's why we had to invade. But for whatever reason, we couldn't announce that, so we made up this other story, and like that wouldn't necessarily be corrupt, right? But I do think there is a level of corruption, what I'm talking about, which is self-servance and not caring about the good of citizens of the United States first and foremost, which I would consider corrupt. But I think more of it is there's this certitude, and I think you nailed this when you talked about the deep state. When you looked at sort of the impeachment of Trump over Ukraine, over that call, and you saw all these people from Obama's State Department, and like George Kent and Vindman and all these people, I forget the woman's name, but they were coming up. They kept using the phrase "our foreign policy," right? And it's like, well, actually, it's Trump's foreign policy. You work for him, right? Like, you don't have your foreign policy.
But that's incorrect. They do have their own foreign policy that is separate from the president. As a matter of fact, so there's something called TAD. It's temporarily assigned duty. And I have a family member who was in the military during the Trump presidency. And basically what they did in order to keep troop numbers up in Syria, Kuwait, and Iraq is they just constantly sent them on temporarily assigned duty, because temporarily assigned duty doesn't need to be reported as like a troop or whatever. So literally, he was moving from Kuwait to Iraq to Syria back to Kuwait every like month or whatever. That way he wouldn't have to be reported as a number. And I guarantee you that's the kind of shit that the Pentagon, the kind of games that the Pentagon played in order to keep the numbers less, so Trump was happy that we have less troops involved in this shit. But realistically, they weren't actually drawing down troops, and they weren't drawing down their capacity because the agenda was, the deep state's agenda was separate from that of Trump's.
Right, and I agree totally, and that's what I'm saying. Like, when I say corrupt, that's sort of what I'm talking about. In other words, even if it's not for nefarious reasons, it's like, democracy be damned. We don't care what the American people voted for or want. We know what needs to be done, and therefore we're going to do it, even if it's against the wishes of the president. And I guess I'll just make it as clear as possible, because we don't have all night. Like, I think that these interventionism and the lies that's been told and the situation, I think it is a net, even if there are benefits, which I could say that, like, it increases the United States economic influence and things like that. When it comes to like average people and constituents, I think they're the ones who pay the sacrifices. It's not the wealthy people that are fighting in wars. It's the and so at some point I say I cannot trust these people that are going rogue basically and making these decisions by themselves and have had disastrous outcome after disastrous outcome, like Libya, like Iraq, like Afghanistan, and now we see the Syria conflict sort of mixed in with Ukraine. And so until those people no longer have the keys, I'm sorry, I'm not going to listen to them the next time they say like, this time we have to go into Yemen. We got to go there. I just don't buy it.
Well, so I know we don't have all night, and we're probably on the last 5 minutes of the talk or whatever. But what I would say is, when those people are no longer in charge, they will be replaced with people just like them because of the nature of our state administrations and all that kind of stuff. And the other thing that I would say is that the military-industrial complex isn't going anywhere. And also, basically, like, you don't have an option. You're kind of along for the ride. And I hate to say that as like, oh, you're a United States citizen, you vote this, that, the other. But I literally think that maybe like the last president who, tried to challenge the military industrial complex and the deep state, I think they got shot. So
they did. Yeah, I agree.
I think JFK was like, yo, this is fucked up. We shouldn't be this involved in shit. And they're like, okay, that's enough of that guy.
There's a lot to that. Like, can they actually be changed? But I still think it's.
Do you remember when Trump said that he was going to declassify all of the JFK fucking documents, and then at the last second he didn't?
Yep, it's crazy,
dude. Like, I'm not saying that it's going to be Bush Senior who fucking did it, but I'm not saying that it's going to be Bush Senior who fucking did it.
yeah, no, but I think you give the reason why I'm so adamant about this, which is like, yeah, you're exactly right. It's something that I say a lot, right? When I talk about corruption at the FBI, for example, I say, yeah, let's assume Donald Trump, the worst was true. Let's assume that he was an agent of Vladimir Putin, terrible, would deserve to possibly die in prison or be executed for treason. I don't disagree with that. I don't think there's any proof that he wasn't, but hypothetically, if that was true, but it's more troubling if there's institutions like what we are just colloquially calling the deep state right here that is engaged in behavior that's detrimental to the United States than one particular president, because an individual politician comes and goes, but that deep state stays. And I think you're right that when these people are replaced, it'll just be replaced. That's why we need to take away their authority and their funding to do these sorts of things. And it might not be possible, but I think it's worth trying for, because I don't think it'll ever change as long as we keep saying, well, if we just get the right general in there, if we just get the right CIA director, I don't think it'll ever change. And I think the sacrifices will be made from the regular citizens of this country that will pay through increased gas prices, loss of life, inflation, and it'll be the people at the top, the elites that'll be raking in money hand over fist. So that's why I say until we change it, which it might not be possible to change, well, then what we do is say these interventionism, it's always going to be worse because we can't trust the people to be altruistic that would be engaged in it or beneficial to the majority of Americans.
Well, and there's a scene from a movie that I want you to keep in mind, and then I kind of want to say what more of my aims are compared to yours. So basically, so the scene from the movie, it's from Lord of War, and basically Nicolas Cage is an arms dealer, and there's a gentleman that he's talking to who actually works for like the United States. And so they're having this conversation, and he's like, during this conflict, you armed both parties. And he was like, yeah, that's right. Have you ever considered that I wanted both parties to lose? Mm-hmm. And so just because Libya is now a fucking, shithole with fucking slavery coming back and fucking economic, disaster, that doesn't mean that wasn't within the realm of acceptable situations for the United States government. Same thing with, I'm trying to think of the other examples that you brought, but you're using like a traditional morality for this. And I just don't think these people operate with the same morality. And then finally, what I would say is like my goal is I view the United States of America as like a fucking tanker, like an oil tanker. And I think you can steer the ship, but I don't think it's a fucking speedboat and you can change the direction on a dime. And so I would say you basically, as smaller creators, as people with a mild amount of political influence, as people who wouldn't complain if multimillionaires asked us our opinions and tried to fucking, make the world a better place or whatever. I would say focusing on trying to steer the tanker is probably going to be more long-term profitable. Because the deep state will just fucking kill you.
Maybe. I'm a rip the Band-Aid off type guy, but it's a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Let me ask you, just before I get you out of here, just a couple things. Are you going to be voting majoritarily Republican, even if you have some question with like maybe particular candidates? So
my wife is furious. But what I did is I voted Democrat for all the environment, like the environmental boards, because like we have like a really sensitive environment down in Florida or whatever. But then I voted all the representatives Republican because they're in charge of the fucking purse strings. So like I want somebody who cares about like the environment and wants to help people and do XYZ in order order to make the world a better place. But I also don't want to turn into fucking California and have them
Right.
spend $1 billion fucking dollars to save some fucking weird like sea turtle fucking,
Right.
you know, like there's only three sea turtles of this one breed and they live in this one canal and we have to like destroy half of Miami to save it. I don't want to do that shit either. So literally, I actually voted centrist. Like I voted legitimately centrist.
That's awesome. Now, I would recommend you vote Republican the whole ticket. But no, I get it. It's funny. Do you have any predictions? Like, what do you think with the House and Senate? I'm predicting 52-53 Republican Senate, maybe 245 in the House, but we'll see what happens. Do you have any feeling on how it might go?
I don't, but what I am hoping is for just like again, slight edge for Republicans. That's what I'm hoping for. Again, so this is kind of like my philosophy. It's like Republicans, they talk about the principles that I care about, but they just want to slash the budget. That's all they want to fucking do. And then Democrats talk about things that I don't necessarily give a shit about, and I think they're well intended, but I think their execution is always dog shit. So I kind of want like the heart and the intentions of the Democrats, but then the common sense of Republicans, and I never get it. So I kind of have to be a centrist.
It makes sense. I think that I can't vote for the Democratic Party at this point through things I see of corruption, authoritarianism. But no, it's interesting. I love talking. One of the things I love, my favorite interactions is talking to people that are intelligent and can defend their positions that come from areas of agreement that are, but disagreement in slightly different ways. So to talk to you, then to talk to Pisco, who there's going to be more disagreement.
Oh, it's going to be, ways. He's coming for the throat, man. You got to be ready. You got to be ready. You need to drink some fucking coffee or some shit.
He's catching me at a good time 18 hours in. And then I got Fabian Liberty, who's coming at me from like a more libertarian.
Oh, and yeah, the opposite angle where he's going to be like, you're not conservative or libertarian enough. You're a fucking leftist cock, you son of a bitch. Yeah.
So I thought this was interesting, like more of a centrist view than left view than more of a right view. I thought that worked out really well for the last three guests. So Counterpoints, people could find you on Counterpoints at Twitch TV. Anywhere else that you would like people to check out?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube, so 90% of my content on the new channel, or not new channel, on the old channel is going to be Warhammer 40k related. Unfortunately, that's like 95% of my channel views, so I just kind of had to follow the algorithm on that one. But I'll still be streaming. Like right now, we got 30, 40 people hanging out with us, and I'll still be streaming politics, and then I'll just be posting like political essays to a third channel and debates to a second channel. So basically, just type in Counterpoints, follow the links, you'll find everything, and yeah, it was fun.
All right. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. Hope you have a great time. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. See you, buddy. Be easy.